Apparently this is working, right? This is Wednesday. Welcome into a special edition of, well, this is like a, closed event right here in the Nutmeg Tavern. Oh boy, that nutmeg smelled good. It's time for the next episode of the Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin book club, Townsends book club here. This is episode 10 of Benjamin Franklin, and he's worth it. Let me tell you, Benjamin Franklin is worth it. So we're jumping in here we're about, I don't know, it only looks like halfway through this book, but we're probably a good bit, past halfway of the important stuff in the Benjamin Franklin autobiography. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe there's going to be some like super nuggets here at the end, but I don't think so. This is the part where we're just getting out of the start of the virtues. And last week, last episode, we really got into his virtues, it was like 13 virtues here. Let me get the headers for the virtues. Temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, chastity, and all important as he found out, he added this one later on, humility. We'll be talking about those. Here we're going to get a little bit more introspection in how he views these much later in life. So this is 1784, and he is in his 70s at this point as he's writing. And this first part that we're going to be covering today, he's writing it from Paris, France, and later on we'll get to where he's back in the United States of his day. So let's get started here. And again, we have been talking about the virtues. He doesn't stop talking about the virtues, but now we get how he feels about how he's done with virtues over time. My scheme of order gave me the most trouble, and I found that though it might be practicable where a man's business was such as to leave him the disposition of his time, that of a journeyman printer, for instance, it was not possible to be exactly observed by a master who must mix with the world and often receive people of business at their own hours. Order, too, with regard to places for things and papers, etc., I found extremely difficult to acquire. I had not been early accustomed to it, and having an exceedingly good memory, I was not so sensible of the inconvenience attending want of method. This article therefore cost me so much painful attention, and my faults in it vexed me so much, and I made so little progress in amendment, and had such frequent relapses, that I was often ready to give up the attempt and content myself with a faulty character in that respect. Now, this is a great sort of story he goes into here. If there's anything, it's like save this one out. It's one of these, I'm not sure that we have these sort of little anecdotes or stories nearly enough. These days we lose sight of it, but I love this story. Let me go back a few words here. Content myself with a faulty character in that respect. So order. He said, like a man who, in buying an axe of a smith, my neighbor, desired to have the whole of its surface as bright as the edge. So when you have a sharpened instrument, it's all been forged out. It's kind of rough and gray looking, but right where you sharpen it, it's going to be nice and shiny silver because you filed it, you ground on it, and everything looks good. But what happens if you desire to have the whole of its surface as bright as the edge, all polished and ground? The smith consenting to grind it bright for him if he would turn the wheel. He'd turn while the smith pressed the broad face of the axe hard and heavily on the stone, which made the turning of it very fatiguing. The man came ready now and then from the wheel to see how the work went on, and at length, would take his axe as it was, without further grinding. No, says the smith, turn on, turn on. We shall have it bright by and by. As yet it's only speckled. Yes, says the man, but I like the speckled axe best. And believe this may have been the case with many who, having for want of some such means as I employed, found the difficulty of obtaining good and breaking bad habits in other points of vice and virtue, have given up the struggle and concluded that a speckled axe was best. I love these little maxims, the speckled axe is best. So as you go grinding on this, so what if I wanted this to be all shiny and smooth? I'd start grinding on it and grinding on it. And there are all these little pits where you have to grind out the pit to get rid of all the speckles. You just got to grind a whole bunch of material off the top of your metal tool. So as you grind, less and less specks are there, but you have to take off a tremendous quantity of metal to get down to this fully bright, shiny surface. In reality, will the tool work any better? No, not really. The tool isn't going to look better if you like a bright and shiny thing. Today, we're used to seeing all our tools all polished and bright and shiny. You go buy a brand new hammer and it's almost chrome plated. It's perfect. So they take all the time. But that's because they, number one, probably cast the tool and there aren't very many pits. And then they take it on a power grinder and it just takes a few seconds to take off all that extra metal. So it doesn't take anybody cranking hard to make this tool bright and shiny, no speckles.
Heather Torrey's in the chat and says, haha, it's easier to want shiny when you don't have to do the hard work.
Exactly. So, yeah, he wanted shiny. The smith said, oh, I'll make it shiny for you. You do all the hard work. And all of a sudden, it's like, no, I think I like it speckled. And in fact, I like the looks of things better when it's forged out and we can see that someone real did it versus, somebody just grinding away with a machine and they can take away the machine marks so you can't tell whether it's handmade or not handmade. But so it's kind of, it's a fun anecdote that we get lost on, or maxim, or whatever you would call it. It loses all its sting today because we don't ever see axes that are like that.
Real quick, they're wondering about page number.
So in this edition, we are on page 93.
And Heather Torrey is in super chat. Be frugal, but not with books.
Too true. Too true. Certainly Benjamin Franklin wasn't frugal. It's like he'd rather give up food than give up books, right? So, I like that speckled axe best. In truth, I found myself incorrigible with the respect to order. And now that I'm grown old and my memory is bad, I feel the sensible want of it. Well, I am right there with Benjamin Franklin in the wanting orderliness and everything in its perfect place. And unfortunately, I'm not very good at that. And I think we're at a great disadvantage here in the modern age, where the material things are less expensive to us in retrospect, and it's the problem of we have so much stuff we don't know where to put it all, right? We have to build barns to fill up with all this stuff that we have. It's very hard to be orderly when you have too much stuff. Obviously, I've got way too much stuff, but I want all this neat stuff so I can make fun 18th century videos.
That's nice that you have stuff, because when it was like, oh man, I wish we had this for a video.
It's like, I think I got one of those. Let me dig around here if I had more order, I'd know exactly where it was at. Instead, it takes me 3 hours to find the dumb thing. So here we go. Here he says he's getting into this idea of more of the virtues and and what he wanted to do with them. So, here he is. He says something like, in his 79th year. He's talking about being 79. He's old at this point. And he's looking back. Here he is trying to finish up this autobiography, and he's looking back at this point and saying, now, what's the most important thing that I did or could have done to make an impact in the future? He's not going to make any impact on himself at 79. It's like there's no more, I'm going to, change my ways and do this or that. He knows that it's like at 79, he is what he is. But he does want to pass on to posterity. And the letters of the gentleman earlier that sort of got him back into his autobiography are saying there are really important things that you need to be passing on, Benjamin Franklin. And they pointed to the idea of the virtues as one of these most important things. And here he starts to talk about what he wanted to do with the virtues and sort of how he wanted to propagate them. And here he talks about sort of coming up with a society. It says, it was, and a book that would kind of go along with it. It would be remarked that though my scheme was not wholly without religion, there is, so he's talking about this whole, his scheme for virtues here. Though my scheme was not wholly without religion, there was in it no mark of any distinguishing tenets of any particular sect. I had purposely avoided them, for being fully persuaded of the utility and excellence of my method, and that it might be serviceable to people in all religions, and intending some time or other to publish it, I would not have anything in it that should prejudice anyone of any sect against it. I purposed writing down a little comment on each virtue, in which I would have shown the advantages of possessing it and the mischiefs attending to its opposite vice, and I should call my book The Art of Virtue, because it would be shown the means and manner of obtaining virtue, which would have distinguished it from mere exhortation to be good. So not just be good, but how am I to be good? That does not instruct and indicate the means, but is like the apostle's man of verbal clarity or charity, who only without showing to the naked and hungry how and where they might get clothes and victuals, exhorted them to be fed and clothed. So, and that's from James 2, 15 and 16. But it so happened that my intentions of writing and publishing this comment was never fulfilled. So he never got a chance to dig into this project and publish it. My list of virtues contained at first but 12 virtues. But a Quaker friend, having kindly informed me that I was generally thought proud, that my pride showed itself frequently in conversation, that I was not content with being in the right when discussing any point, but was overbearing and rather insolent, of which he convinced me by mentioning several instances, I determined endeavoring to cure myself, if I could, of this vice or folly among the rest. And I added humility to my list, giving an extensive meaning to the word. I cannot boast of much success inquiring the reality of this virtue. But I had a good deal with regards to the appearance of it. I made it a rule to forbear all direct contradiction to the sentiments of others and all positive assertions of my own. I even forbid myself, agreeable to the old laws of our junto, the use of every word or expression in the language that imported a fixed opinion, such as certainly, undoubtedly, etc., and adopted instead I conceive, or I apprehend, or I imagine a thing to be so-and-so, or it appears to me at present, when another asserted something that I thought in error. I denied myself the pleasure of contradicting him abruptly and of showing immediately some absurdity to his proposition. And in answering, I began observing that in certain cases or circumstances, his opinion would be right. But in the present case, there appeared or seemed to be some difference, etc. I like the idea that here he's listed this virtue of humility, and he totally understands that this humility and this pride is inside, right? It's like he could change the outside appearance of it, but he was never able to conquer the inner pride, inner humility, because that's not easy to do.
So let's talk about something real quick. Somebody in the chat just said Ben knew exactly how gifted he was. And so I've been kind of stewing over, he wrote this later in his life, and he seems to be very self-aware. But most people later in their life are pretty self-aware. When do you think that caught up in the timeline of his life?
Well, I think that by the fact that he came up with these virtues early and that he was trying to achieve them, he's being very self-observant very, very early on. So, by the time he's 20, he's already working on these things, and you can't work on them without, studying yourself and studying others and their reaction to you. Some people just sort of kind of go through life, right? And they just let things happen to them, and they don't really kind of understand how they drove particular people. So they're quick to say, they did this thing. And I didn't have anything. I wasn't involved. I didn't do. It just happened to me. When of course, that's not really true at all. Every one of us is active, even in our inactivity. In a way, we are active in changing what's happening around us, especially with people's reactions. And of course, he's doing this a lot. He's being very, very looking at. From his teens. He was looking at some of these things like the appearance of this humility thing. And obviously the person who came to him and, it's like, well, you're missing the virtue of humility here. He identifies that person as a Quaker, which I think is good and interesting in that the Quakers were trying to, that was one of the things they were trying to quell. That was one of the reasons why they had a strict dress code and other kinds of, behavioral things. They were trying to, not that it's easy to do that, and he'll allude to it here in a second. Even in your idea of suppressing things and flattening things out, you can say, I'm the most humble, right? Or I'm, my clothing is the plainest of everyone here. It's like, well, then aren't you, haven't you just flipped this thing on its head? Let's see. So yeah, he found like occasionally I was actually wrong. I would have jumped on that person and by taking time and not jumping on this person immediately when he thought that the person was wrong, he finds out that Benjamin Franklin, he himself, is actually wrong. In this mode, which I at first put on with some violence to natural inclination, became at length so easy and so habitual to me that perhaps for these 50 years past, no one, almost talk about the humble brag here, no one has ever heard a dogmatical expression escape me. He sounds proud of it, right? But no, here we go. He comes back. I think that one's, a little tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah, it's just.
Yeah. He says, in reality, there is perhaps no one of our natural passions so hard to subdue as pride. Disguise it, struggle with it, beat it down, stifle it, mortify it as much as one pleases, and it's still alive, and will every now and then peep out and show itself. You will see it perhaps often in this history, this book. For even if I could conceive that I had completely overcome it, I should probably be proud of my humility. So there you go.
Nobody who hasn't had their own struggle with pride would describe the struggle that way. I mean, that was perfect.
So he does a good job. So boom, this is the cutoff for 1784. So he leaves the manuscript alone, and he comes back to it 4 years later. That part was written while he was in France. So here we are now in August of 1788. He picks it up and begins again. And yet he begins almost, he's obviously has his paper. He can see where he left off. And he doesn't want to leave it completely alone and skip to the next section, but he kind of connects on to this next part. And it's interesting. There's some connections with things that are going on now and in the future. So let me jump in here. I'm just going to point out that he has these little notes that he found in his library, little observations, and they're just little lines. And the first one is that the great affairs of the world, the wars and revolutions, etc., were carried on and affected by parties. And then the next one, he has a clip out. It's about parties. Different parties occasion all confusion. While a party carried on so he's grabbing out these little quotes that he wrote at that time, and he the word that pops out every time is a party, and he means here, I think, a group of like-minded men with some particular interest in mind. Let's go here on page 98, about halfway through. Let me read this one here. There seems to me at present to be a great occasion for rising and it's all in it's in uppercase letters, a united party for virtue, by forming the virtuous and good men in all nations into a regular body to be governed by suitable, good, and wise rules, which good and wise men may probably be more unanimous in their obedience to than common people are to common laws. So he's trying to get together these, sort of virtuous men into a clump so that they can make something happen. And then he jumps down and he starts talking about this project of this group of virtuous men. And he comes up with his own little creed here, right? Which is interesting. I find one purporting to be the substance of an intended creed, containing, as I thought, the essentials of every known religion and being free of everything that might shock professors of any religion. It is expressed in these words, that there is one God who made all things, that he governs the world by his providence, that he ought to be worshipped by adoration, prayer, and thanksgiving, but that the most acceptable service of God is to do good to man, that the soul is immortal, and that God will certainly reward virtue and punish vice, either here or hereafter. So, boom, that's kind of the end of this little, and again, this is early. These are like things he's looking back on, papers that he's looking back on from 1731 or something like that. So he's like trying to form this, this idea for this group of of people. And then he says, how am I going to create this society, this party of men, this united party for virtue? My ideas at the time were that the sect would begin and spread at first among young and single men only, that each person to be initiated should only declare his assent to such a creed, the one that was written there, but should have exercised himself with 13 weeks of examination and practice of the virtues, as in before a mentioned model, and that the existence of such a society should be kept secret. It's like, well, okay, well, I don't know why we need to keep it secret, but then he says, till it became considerable to prevent solicitations for the admission of improper persons. So we don't want unvirtuous people. I guess, the idea is that you would see somebody who you thought was a good candidate for that, and you would, kind of bring him into it, right? That we should call this the Society of the Free and Easy. Oh, Benjamin Franklin. Free as being by the general practice and habits of the virtues, free from the dominion of vice, and particularly by the practice of industry and frugality, free from debt, which exposes a man to confinement and is a species of slavery to his creditors. So he has this plan, this idea. And thankfully, he puts that away. He said he connected with like 2 people, and that kind of worked out. But then he got busy with work, so it's like, well, maybe there are more important things to do. I'm not sure what would have become of his society of the, what is it, free and easy.
The free and easy.
The free and easy. I don't know if you want to call it that, but anyway. Okay, a little utopian, if you ask me, but what can I say?
Yeah, it's the most flower child sounding thing I've heard Franklin say.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. But, again, he's willing to think way outside the box. I don't think a lot of people were, well, they call him a free thinker. Free and easy, there you go. Here we go. And then he kind of gets back into a little bit more of what's going on here. It's still connected with the virtues a little, but here we are, page 100. In 1732, I first published my almanac. I've got one around here somewhere. It might be downstairs. I've got an actual, not one of his almanacs, but an almanac from about 1798 in its original form. I have to remember that for the live stream. I've got one somewhere. Anyway, 1732, I first published my almanac, and that's what was famous for, right? It's Poor Richard's Almanac. Under the name Richard Saunders. It was continued by me about 25 years, commonly called Poor Richard's Almanac. I endeavored to make it both entertaining and useful, and it accordingly came to be in such demand that I reaped considerable profit from it, vending annually near 10,000. So he sold near 10,000 copies every year. That's
wow,
pretty good.
Yeah.
I'd be super happy with that. Now this is a little pamphlet. It's about this big. So not a terribly big thing, probably less than 35 pages, but chock full, as he will tell us. And observing that it was generally read, scarce any neighborhood in the province being without it, I considered to be a proper vehicle for conveying instruction among the common people, who bought scarcely any other books. I therefore filled it with all the little, I filled all the little spaces that occurred between the remarkable days in the calendar with proverbial sentences, chiefly such as inculcated industry and frugality as a means of procuring wealth and thereby securing virtue. it being more difficult for a man in want to act always honestly as to use here one of those proverbs, it is hard for an empty sack to stand upright. So he collects all these little proverbs, and he just like fills up let's put them in the margins, let's put them between the stories. Look, there's a tiny little blank space. And of course, he's a printer, and if anybody is going to put together something and, it's like, well, how am I going to fill this? Today we use all kinds of desktop publishing programs and whatnot. Sometimes we can squeeze little bits in there. Ryan's probably got a lot to say about that. Ryan puts together the catalog, right? So it's like, I'm going to put some copy here. I'm going to put a little box there. I got a blank. What am I going to do?
Right. Well, back in my high school days, I used to put together zines as well.
Okay.
And then with those, I didn't have desktop publishing, so it was all layers and layers of copying and scanning and that to arrange it. So that was terrible.
So yeah, you could and if you look at them, they're horrible by today's standard. We look at them and it's like, oh, what is this, right? But if you only get one pamphlet a year, what are you going to get? I used to have a book, the little black book that was full of just all kinds of everything. It had, weights and measures, and it had, special little facts, and that was the kind of book that the almanac was. It told you about the days of the year and calendars and special things going on, and when to plant your potatoes, and all this little proverbial knowledge, and maybe little sections on kings and queens of England, or all kinds of strange history things. There's everything sort of jammed in there.
For some reason, I thought Poor Richard's Almanac was more regular than annual.
No,
I didn't realize
it's
that.
just like an annual thing, and a lot of it has to do with just the when the full moons are, and all this, because those things are a lot more important to people in this day and age. Today, it's like, do we care when? Maybe if you're somebody who's on the coast and you need to know about the tides or something, and when is a full moon, it matters. We don't care about when there's a full moon. It doesn't really matter. It did matter to people in that time. He talks about how he thinks that, changing the almanac and putting all these things in it really does help society, right? So, the whole people around them. And the book does have a couple of facsimile pages, and you can kind of see they are chock full of content. And this pamphlet would have been sewn with string. So each and every one, they'd group those pages together, and they would just tie them together with a couple special little knots and string them together. And then he kind of goes on here. He's talking about the newspaper and how he was working sort of ethically within the newspaper. In conduct of my newspaper, I carefully excluded all libeling and personal abuse, which is of late years becoming so disgraceful to our country. Think social media, guys, here. Whenever I was solicited to insert anything of that kind, libelous or personally abusive, and the writers pleaded, as they generally did, liberty of the press, and that a newspaper was like a stagecoach in which anyone would pay, had a right to a place, my answer was that I would print the piece separately if desired, and the author might have as many copies as he pleases to distribute himself, but that I would not take upon me to spread his detraction, and that having contracted with my subscribers to furnish them with what might be either useful or entertaining. So here he's like, you want to print something that says something mean about somebody. My subscribers came here for useful and entertaining information, and so I was like, no, I get to print what I want, and I don't want to print what you want to do, because that's going to be harmful to somebody else. But it's like, if you want to print it, Okay, I'll print it for you. You can distribute it. And I can see his point there, big time, right? Here's the last little section. And again, it's kind of back in the printing house, talking about a particular instance. In 1733, I sent one of my journeymen to Charleston, South Carolina. Ah, Charleston.
Beautiful, beautiful place. Gotta love it.
Where a printer was wanting. I furnished him with a press and letters on an agreement of partnership by which I was to receive 1/3 of the profits of the business, paying 1/3 of the expense. He was a man of learning and honest, but ignorant in matters of account. And though he sometimes made me remittances, I could get no account from him, nor any satisfactory state of our partnership while he lived. On his decease, and you wonder how old the guy was, on his decease, the business was continued by his widow. Being born and bred in Holland, where, as I have been informed, the knowledge of accounts makes a part of a female education, she not only sent me a clear state, as she could, find of the transactions past, but continued to account with the greatest regularity and exactness every quarter afterwards, and managed the business with such success that she not only brought up reputably a family of children, but at the expiration of the term was able to purchase of me the printing house and establish her son in it. I think that's a really, really interesting story.
Yeah. Like for a number of reasons.
Yeah, exactly.
First off, like my thing is can you imagine being in business with somebody? Is he in Philadelphia at the time?
Yeah.
Yeah, and from Philadelphia to Charleston without a telephone or regular communication, that's just, right. I can't imagine that.
Right. And this is pretty early on in his, printing career, 1733. He's not, let's see, -6 here. So he's in his late 20s, and he's able to create this entire venture. It's like, okay, I'm going to set you up. I'm going to set you up with a press. I'm going to set you up with letters. You're already probably trained. You probably worked in a print shop with him. He knows the guy is fairly, as he says, he's educated. What does he say? A man of learning and honest, but ignorant of accounts. So, those things are I don't know. I'm trying to think. There's probably a lot of business situations are like that. People are in business, especially, individuals, which there were a lot more in that time period than there probably are now as a percentage. But, you go into business and you might be good at doing a thing. Maybe you're a really good blacksmith or you're, whatever, but you have to be more than just good at being a blacksmith. If you're a one-man business, you have to be production, and you have to be sometimes management if you have somebody working with you. So you got to keep them at work. You got to be good at marketing because there's no salesman. And you have to be good at bookkeeping because you got no bookkeeper. You can't be good at everything.
You don't know anything about that personally, right?
Yeah, I don't know anything about that personally. And so, you see this person is like, yeah, he was learned, he was honest, but he just didn't do his accounting very well. And that can ruin the business all by itself, right? Maybe he didn't know whether he was making money or not. Maybe he didn't know he was being taken to the cleaners by one of his suppliers or somebody he was, selling things to, because he just wasn't good at the accounting part. And then, he dies. Now, Charleston, South Carolina, probably not the healthiest place to live. So, this man may not have been very old at all, but he dies, and here his wife takes over the business. And yes, that happens a lot. And Benjamin Franklin even comes down in here and says, he kind of takes this story and I think he extends on it. Maybe not. Yeah, right. He says, I mention this affair chiefly for the sake of recommending that branch of education for our young females as likely to be of more use to them and their children in case of widowhood than either music or dancing. By preserving them from the losses by imposition of crafty men and enabling them to continue, and perhaps a profitable mercantile house with established correspondence till the son is grown up and fit to undertake and go on with it. So it's like, yeah, look how good. Look at the idea of educating the young females in this family in this way is doing a really, really good thing. They shouldn't just don't just teach them music and dancing. That's not helpful to them, especially in a situation like this where all of a sudden, all the family things come on them and they need to be able to, conduct business and do all these good things. So it's an interesting little story for all the little things it has connected with it. What do you think, Ryan?
I'm just looking at the chat.
Uh-oh. Are you guys being good in the chat? I hope so.
They're being great.
This section of the book, really, really interesting. Thinking about, how old he is at this point, looking back on life, thinking about what he wants to give. He knows, it's like, I'm not going to live forever, right? Even he's talking about his physical and even sometimes, memory decline here. And he's like, well, I've got to put this stuff on paper. I've still got to grab up these concepts and deliver them into the future, just like he was doing, in his 30s and 20s and 30s with Poor Richard's Almanac. It's like, hey, what can I print that isn't just, hey, look, I sold 10,000 copies, but hey, this actually made a difference in the lives of the people I sold them to. Really, really interesting stuff about where he's going with that.
We just got a super chat from Dustin Williams. We'll see how you feel about this. John Townsend is the Ben Franklin of our generation, is what it says.
If only I was as smart and forward-thinking as Benjamin Franklin, let me tell you. But there are certainly a lot of Benjamin Franklin traits that I would want to strive for. That's for certain. That's for certain.
There really aren't a whole lot of questions in the chat.
That's good. It's
fine. Been a really great conversation. Some off-topic things. One person said that they were having their hardtack that they made from our video with their tea while they were watching. I thought that was interesting. Sounds great. It's a hockey puck.
This one had a bug growing in it too, but he's gone now.
Oh, it's okay still.
I named him.
What was his name?
Wormy. That's the spot where he was living for a while. But I guess it got too hard for him. He gave up and moved on to richer pastures.
Somebody else asked about suggestions on a book that covers long-hunter knives.
Long-hunter knives. I'm not sure about current pieces, but there's Swords and Blades of the American Revolution by Newman. And undoubtedly there are some newer works. That's, old. I don't have any of the newer pieces off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's some newer research that gets a little more specific about that sort of thing. Sometimes it's a little tricky to, pin those knives down to, a long hunter had this one, right? Because everyone had knives like that. So, deciding, it's like, what's a standard butcher kitchen knife that would be in every home? Or, a long hunter had this. I don't know that there's any real difference, right? Except, by the specific examples that people might find. But knives were a huge trade item. So, being sold to just regular people, Native Americans, it had a giant demand. So there's a lot of different ones, styles and little permutations that are out there for knives.
Somebody's in the chat, KP. John, I guess I missed it. Did the wife pay him back for the press, or did she just buy him outright?
No, it says here. So she sent him the regular the updates every quarter, and managed the business with such success that she not only brought up a reputable the family of children, but at the expiration of the term was able to purchase of me the printing house. So yes, she completely paid up the deal. It's like, oh yeah, at this point in time, I'm able to just purchase, buy out the partnership, which is what she did.
Full well knowing that if she wanted to, she could have just walked away, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah,
it's just,
undoubtedly.
Shows a lot of character.
Well, but also in that circumstance, she was, it's like if she walked away from it, what was her livelihood going to be, right? So she was able to, continue on with the ownership of this partnership that her husband left behind. And yes, there are lots of circumstances where, a husband dies and the wife carries on with that business. It's not, sometimes you have these, oh, women weren't in business. That's not really true at all. There's a lot of circumstances that are like this one.
Well, and the unfortunate thing is, if you're just kind of skimming through the lines of history, you're not going to find the examples like that very often. But when you dig into a book like this, then you can find them.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
I think that we're covered here.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining me on this, the 10th edition of the Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin here in the Townsends Book Club live stream. We are having a lot of fun with that, and wow, I'm not sure exactly. I hope that we can kind of get going a little bit faster, but it just keeps getting really good here. So we'll see about how fast or how slow we go through the rest of this particular autobiography. But it's so good. I don't want to rush through it. Great examples like that. And now I think we're back into sort of more the historical thing instead of kind of this backed out concept that he had with the virtues, which he kind of. It's almost like he took a breath there and wanted to take more time to explain it. But we're getting back into the timeline. Make sure to check in with us on this Friday's live stream. We should, in theory, we're going to try to be in the German kitchen for this next live stream. So we won't be in the Nutmeg Tavern here, but on location, as it were. We'll see if we make that happen. Who knows what happened with the time vortex and the eddies and flows of how that works here. So that'll be an awful lot of fun. I hope you've had a great time in the Nutmeg Tavern today. Thank you, Ryan, for jumping in there and taking care of all that chat. And I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Don't forget to join us next week for the next episode next Wednesday at 4 o'clock Eastern Time.
I just had a super chat come in. It says it's from Clyde. Super appreciate how fast you guys get stuff shipped out.
Thank you very much. We enjoy. Well, I don't want to sit on an order. I want my stuff right away, and I know you guys do too. So thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend or evening.